The doctor's voice was calm, almost too calm. The treatment will cost over $100,000, with less than a 10% chance of recovery. My family didn't cry. They didn't argue. They didn't even glance at me. They just stood there for a moment and walked out. No hug, no goodbye, just the click of heels fading down the hallway. My mother's words were the last thing I heard before the door closed. Let her go. She's lived long enough. I stood frozen beside Grandma's bed, the beeping of the monitors loud in the sudden emptiness. I was 17, broke, terrified, and completely alone, but I stayed. 7 years later, they came back. Not to apologize, not to mourn, but to claim every last dollar of the inheritance. And when the lawyer read the will, I watched the color drain from their faces. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until the nurse stepped closer. Are you Victoria? She asked gently. I nodded. We'll need someone to sign the financial responsibility forms. Without immediate intervention, she won't make it through the week. Her words felt like a weight pressing on my chest. I was 17. I had a part-time job shelving books at the library, a college savings account I'd scraped together from babysitting and summer shifts at the diner, and a bank balance that could barely cover next month's bus pass. But none of that mattered. Because the woman lying in that bed wasn't just an old patient. She was my grandmother, the one who made me pancakes shaped like animals when I was sick, the one who told me stories about her childhood on a farm, the one who always had my back when my parents didn't. I picked up the pen. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely read the signature line, but I signed anyway. The forms felt like a legal death sentence, except I wasn't letting her die. I walked to the ATM down the hall and withdrew the entire balance of my savings, $11,480. I handed it over at the billing desk without letting myself think about the years I'd spent earning it. That money was supposed to take me to college. Now, it would keep Grandma alive. Then I went to the hospital's HR department and begged for a job, any job. By 6 p.m., I was wearing a janitor's uniform and pushing a mop across the pediatric wing. My plan was simple: work, pay the bills, and stay with her until she was out of danger. That night, I sat by her bed long after visiting hours were over. I read aloud from an old paperback I'd found in the waiting room, my voice steady even as my eyes burned from exhaustion. The machines beeped and hissed around us, but she didn't stir. I told her about school, about how I'd been dreaming of studying engineering, about how much I hated the way my mother's voice sounded when she said the word dream, like it was something childish. By the time the nurse told me I had to leave, it was past midnight. I kissed Grandma's hand, whispered, "I'm not going anywhere," and headed back to the supply closet where I kept my cleaning cart. I didn't know if she could hear me. I didn't know if she would survive the week. But I knew one thing: if the rest of my family could abandon her without looking back, then I could do the opposite. I could stay. Grandma didn't wake up for 3 days. I counted each hour by the sound of the monitors, by the nurse's footsteps in the hallway, by the cooling coffee cups I left untouched on the bedside table. On the second night, I fell asleep in the chair, my forehead pressed against her blanket. When I opened my eyes, the morning sun was spilling through the blinds, turning her silver hair into a soft halo. She looked so peaceful, like she was just resting. But I knew the truth. Without the treatments I'd signed for, she wouldn't be here at all. On the third day, a raspy voice broke through my half-dream. You stayed. I jerked upright. Her eyes were open, glassy but aware, searching my face. Of course I stayed, I whispered, swallowing the lump in my throat. Always. Her fingers curled weakly around mine, and for a moment, the machines, the bills, the exhaustion, all of it faded. She was still here. That was enough. From that day on, I made a ritual of reading to her every evening. It didn't matter what magazines from the hospital gift shop, old romance novels from the library discard bin, even IKEA furniture manuals I found in the break room. I just wanted her to hear my voice. At first, she barely responded. Sometimes her eyelids would flutter, sometimes her hand would twitch. But then, one afternoon while I was spoon-feeding her broth, she made a face. Too salty, she croaked. I froze, then laughed so hard I nearly dropped the spoon. That's the first thing you say to me? Critique my cooking? Her lips curved into the smallest smile. You've always been terrible at seasoning. It was the most beautiful complaint I'd ever heard. The days turned into weeks, and little by little, she grew stronger. She could sit up with help, then speak for longer stretches. Eventually, we were walking slow laps around the ward, her arm hooked through mine, her slippers shuffling against the tile. The doctors called it unexpected progress. I called it love, refusing to let go. Every shift break, I'd rush upstairs to check on her. Every night, I'd leave the pediatric wing smelling of bleach and head straight for her room, where she'd be waiting with a tired smile. We didn't talk much about my family. The silence between us was an unspoken agreement. They had chosen their path, and we had chosen ours. One evening, as I adjusted her blanket, she squeezed my hand and said, "You're stronger than they'll ever know, Victoria." I didn't feel strong. I felt tired, broke, and stretched so thin I could snap. But looking at her, alive and smiling, I realized strength wasn't about feeling invincible. It was about staying, even when it hurt. And I was staying. When Grandma was finally cleared to leave the hospital, it wasn't like in the movies, no dramatic music, no balloons, no crowd waiting with open arms. It was just me, pushing her wheelchair down the sterile hallway toward the sliding glass doors, a bag of her belongings on my shoulder, and a stack of medical bills tucked inside my backpack like a silent shadow. We didn't have a home to return to. My parents had already reallocated my old bedroom into something else, and I wasn't about to beg them for a couch to sleep on. So I found us a small one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. The walls were stained, the heater clanged like it was haunted, and the kitchen light flickered every time you turned on the tap, but it was ours. The first night there, I helped Grandma into bed and sat on the floor beside her. "It's not much," I admitted. She reached out and patted my hand. "It's more than enough. Because it's not about the place, it's about the people inside it." During the day, I worked split shifts cleaning at the hospital in the mornings, taking odd jobs in the afternoons. At night, I studied for my GED at the tiny kitchen table, while Grandma dozed in her armchair. It wasn't long before she started teaching me things. Too, not just Grandma things like how to make a perfect pie crust or hand-stitch a torn hem, but skills I never imagined she had. She showed me how to balance a budget, repair a leaky faucet, and even fix small electrical appliances. "Most people throw something away as soon as it stops working," she told me, handing me a screwdriver one evening. "But if you understand how it works, you can bring it back to life." That's true for machines. And for people. At first I was clumsy, dropping screws, mixing up wires, but she was patient. Every little fix felt like a victory. Soon, the counter was cluttered with old radios, busted toasters, and second-hand coffee makers people in the building had tossed our way. We fixed them all. We didn't make money from it yet, but it gave us something better: pride. Every time an appliance hummed back to life, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could do the same for myself. One evening, after I repaired the broken knob on our microwave, Grandma sat back with a satisfied smile. "You've got a builder's mind, Victoria. That's rare," I laughed, shaking my head. "I'm just a janitor who doesn't want to burn her dinner." But later, lying in bed, I replayed her words over and over. Builder's mind. Rare. In a world where my own family had discarded me as easily as a broken toaster, she saw value. And she was teaching me to see it, too. For the first few months after Grandma came home, I kept expecting my phone to ring. Part of me thought maybe my parents just needed time, that one day they'd call and ask how she was doing. Maybe even offer to help. I pictured awkward conversations, maybe even a grudging apology. But that call never came. Instead, I got a notification from the bank. The joint account my mother used to manage had been closed. A week later, my phone service shut off. They'd removed me from the family plan without warning. No explanation, no conversation, just gone. I stared at the dead phone screen, feeling something inside me splinter, not because I'd lost their financial help, but because it meant they'd cut the last fragile thread between us. When I told Grandma, she didn't look surprised. She just placed her knitting needles down and said softly, "Some people only know how to love when it's easy. You're not one of those people." The bills piled up faster than I could pay them. I started working double shifts, cleaning hospital floors at night, stocking shelves at a corner store during the day. My GED textbooks gathered dust until I forced myself to study during my bus rides between jobs. I skipped meals so Grandma could eat better ones. She caught me once, pushing the last piece of toast toward her and pretending I wasn't hungry. "You're not skipping again," she said firmly. Then her eyes softened. "If you're going to work yourself to the bone, at least make it worth something." That's when she made me a deal. She'd teach me everything she knew, mechanics, sewing, even basic carpentry if I promised to start charging for repairs. Within a month, we had a shoebox under the sink labeled Repair Fund. By month 3, neighbors were knocking on our door asking if we could fix their old blenders, mend broken chairs, or rewire faulty lamps. Word spread. People came not just because we could fix things, but because we cared. One evening, while tightening the screws on an ancient coffee grinder, Grandma said, "You don't need their name to build your own." I looked at her. "Whose name?" She didn't answer, just kept working. But in that silence, I understood. She was preparing me not for revenge, not for payback, but for independence. For a life where my worth didn't depend on anyone else's approval. By the end of that year, I'd earned my GED. It wasn't much in the eyes of the family who'd abandoned me, but to me, it was proof. Proof that I could keep moving forward, even with every bridge behind me burned to ash. And I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was building. Our little repair corner in the apartment started as a way to make ends meet. But within a year, it became something bigger. The shoebox under the sink grew heavier each month. First it was just neighbors in the building. Then people from down the street started showing up, holding busted hair dryers, broken radios, even wobbly dining chairs. I learned quickly that every item had a story. The old lamp that belonged to someone's late father. The toaster a couple had received as a wedding gift 50 years ago. Fixing these things wasn't just about wires and screws. It was about restoring pieces of people's lives. One rainy afternoon, a customer brought in a small battered device she called a fall alarm for her elderly mother. It had stopped working months ago, and she couldn't afford a replacement. I took it apart on the kitchen table, careful not to lose the tiny screws. Grandma leaned over my shoulder. "You know," she said, "you could build one of these from scratch." I laughed. "Sure, and next I'll be building spaceships." But she was serious. Over the next few weeks, we tinkered in every spare moment, researching components online, sketching designs on scrap paper, testing circuits until our fingers smelled faintly of solder. We called it the Safe Step, a simple, affordable, wearable device that could detect a fall and send an alert. It wasn't perfect at first. The first prototype went off every time Grandma sat down too quickly. The second one refused to turn on unless you tapped it with a spoon. But by the third version, it worked reliably enough to show the local clinic. They were impressed and ordered 5 units. That was our first official sale. It wasn't a fortune, but it felt like one. We reinvested the money into more materials. Within months, we had a small client base, individual families, 2 assisted living facilities, and a home healthcare agency. The orders trickled in slowly but steadily. I still worked my hospital cleaning job to cover the bills, but every time I looked at our little production corner in the apartment, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years: hope. One night, as I was packaging up an order, Grandma said, "You're not just fixing things anymore, Victoria. You're creating them." I smiled, tucking the box into the pile for delivery. Guess we're both builders now. That was the moment I realized we were no longer just surviving. We were making something real, something that could outlast the bitterness my family had left behind. And deep down, I knew, if they ever found out, they wouldn't come to congratulate me. They'd come for what they thought they were owed. It happened quietly, the way the seasons change. At first, I barely noticed the little signs: how Grandma's steps grew slower, how she'd pause in the middle of stirring her tea, as if she'd forgotten what she was doing. She still insisted on winding her sewing machine every morning, still teased me when I burned toast, but there was a heaviness in her movements that scared me. The doctors called it natural decline. I hated those words. She was 89 when she finally admitted she didn't want another hospital stay. "I've had enough beeping machines in my life," she told me, sitting in her favorite chair by the window. "If I go, I want to go here with you." I promised her she would. One Tuesday morning, I came into the living room with 2 mugs of coffee. She was there in her chair, a closed book on her lap, her glasses resting on top. Her hands were still warm when I took them in mine, but I knew she was gone. No monitors, no chaos, just peace. I sat there holding her hand until the sun moved across the floor. I didn't want to call anyone. I didn't want the world to know she'd left. The funeral was small, just the way she'd wanted. No flowers, no speeches, no long processions. Just a few neighbors, the director from the clinic who had bought our first safe step devices, and a handful of friends we'd made over the years. I was standing by the churchyard gate, thanking people as they left, when I heard it, the click of expensive heels on gravel. I turned and there they were. My mother, my uncle and his wife, my cousin in a tailored black suit that looked more suited for a boardroom than a burial. They looked around like tourists at someone else's grief, scanning the place as if expecting to find something worth taking home. "Victoria," my mother said warmly, spreading her arms like we were old friends. "You've grown into such a beautiful woman." I didn't move. She tried again. "I know things got complicated back then, but we're still family. And your grandmother, well, she would have wanted us together today." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I nodded toward the chapel. "She's inside. You have 5 minutes." They didn't stay long enough to make polite faces during the service, long enough to be seen. It was only as the crowd thinned that my mother came back to me, that familiar, tight smile on her face. "So," she said lightly, "about the estate. We assume there's a will. Your grandmother wasn't careless." I met her gaze, my voice steady. "There is. And for the first time in years, I felt the faintest shadow of the storm that was coming. The next morning, I arrived at the law office 15 minutes early. Not because I was nervous, but because I'd been ready for this moment for years. Mr. Hollis, Grandma's attorney, greeted me with his usual quiet professionalism. He'd known her since the early days of Safe Step, back when we were still soldering wires at the kitchen table. The conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and paper. At the center of the table sat a sealed envelope and a small cedar box Grandma had given me months before, telling me not to open it until this day. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door swung open. My mother walked in first, heels too sharp for her words. My uncle and his wife followed, their faces set like they were walking into a business negotiation. My cousin slid into the chair across from me, smirking like he'd already spent the inheritance. No one said hello. Mr. Hollis cleared his throat. "This is the last will and testament of Margaret Hale, signed and notarized on her 88th birthday." He turned to me. "Victoria, would you please open the box?" I lifted the lid. Inside was Grandma's gold locket worn smooth from decades of use. Beneath it lay a USB drive and a folded note. Mr. Hollis plugged the drive into a small monitor. The screen lit up with her face older, softer, but with the same steady gaze she'd always given me. "If you're hearing this," she began, "I've already left this world. And if the people I expect are in this room, well, I'm not surprised." My mother shifted in her seat. My cousin stared at the ceiling. "I'll make this simple," Grandma continued. "I leave the entirety of my estate, my shares in Safe Step, my personal accounts, my home, and all intellectual property to my granddaughter Victoria Hale. Everything." For a moment, silence. Then the explosion. "This isn't legal," my mother snapped. "She was with you every day. Who knows what you told her to turn her against us?" Mr. Hollis held up a document. "Mrs. Hale underwent a cognitive evaluation 2 weeks before recording this message. Full capacity confirmed. No coercion, no revision needed." My cousin leaned forward. "She was a janitor. She lived off Grandma. This is theft." On the screen, Grandma's voice cut through their outrage, as if she'd anticipated every word. "To those who say she took from me, I say this. She gave me 7 more years. She gave me mornings with sunlight and coffee. She gave me meaning. You gave me silence. You walked away. She stayed." My uncle's jaw tightened. My mother's face went pale. Mr. Hollis closed the folder with finality. "There are no alternate beneficiaries. A no-contest clause is in place. Any legal challenge will void your right to inherit anything." The air seemed heavier. They looked at me like they were seeing someone they couldn't quite recognize. We filed out into the hallway, And that's when my mother's voice dropped to a hiss. You think this makes you better than us? You manipulated an old woman on her deathbed. I met her glare without flinching. You left her, you left me, and for 7 years, you never once asked if she was alive. My uncle stepped in. We're her children. That means something. I turned to him. Yes. It means you had a duty. You just didn't want to do it. My cousin sneered. We'll take this to court. We'll tell the press you tricked her. I smiled not because I was amused, but because I was ready. Go ahead. I'll release the full footage of her testimony, the medical evaluations, and every letter she wrote about what you did or didn't do when she needed you most. Let the world see the kind of family you are. They fell silent. I reached into my bag and handed my mother the folded note from the cedar box. She hesitated, then opened it. 3 words in Grandma's neat handwriting stared back at her. You walked away. Her hands trembled. For the first time, she had no reply. I turned toward the door. You didn't just lose the inheritance, I said quietly. You lost her a long time ago. The house felt different without her, not empty exactly, but quieter. I kept the gold locket from the cedar box on my nightstand. I still wound it open each morning, just to see the tiny photo of her younger self smiling at me. It wasn't valuable to anyone else, but to me, it was everything. For a while, I didn't know what to do with the inheritance. Money had never been my motivation. What I had now wasn't just wealth, it was responsibility. One night, I found myself at the kitchen table, staring at Grandma's old sewing kit. The thought came to me like a whisper. Don't just keep what she gave you, grow it. So I did. I used a portion of the inheritance to launch the Hale Foundation, named not just for our family name, but for the woman who built something out of nothing. The mission was simple: provide technical training and emotional support for teens and seniors who'd been abandoned, just like we had been. We started small: 2 laptops, a workbench, and a rented room in the back of a community center. But the day our first student fixed her own basic fall sensor and grinned like she'd just discovered magic, I felt something click deep in my chest. That was Grandma, living on. A year later, we had our first permanent workshop. By year 5, one of our scholarship recipients became a lead engineer at SafeStep. She invited me to her graduation and told me, I never had a real family, but you made me feel like I mattered. I gave her Grandma's favorite screwdriver, the one she always said fixed more than just machines. You do matter, I told her. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. My life is still simple. No mansions, no sports cars, just purpose and peace. Because real wealth isn't in what you own. It's in the extra years I got with her. It's in the people I've helped repair. It's in knowing that when the rest of the world walked away, I stayed. One day, I'll pass the gold locket to someone else who's ready. Not because it's worth money, but because it carries everything that matters. And I'll tell them what she once told me. You stayed, you built, and now it's yours.